My name's Deborah, and let me paint you a picture of my family. There's my mom, Karen, yeah, fitting name, I know. She's all about her career and freedom. Then there's my dad, Tom, who's about as useful as a screen door on a submarine when it comes to parenting. My sister, Jessica, is 14 years older than me and couldn't care less about my existence. I came into this world as an unwelcome surprise. Mom was 42 when she found out she was pregnant with me. She thought it was menopause at first. Guess the universe has a twisted sense of humor. When she finally dragged herself to the doctor, it was too late to take care of it, if you catch my drift. From what I pieced together over the years, it went something like this. Tom, what the hell are we going to do? Mom probably screeched, pacing around their bedroom. Dad, being the spineless wonder he is, probably just shrugged. I don't know, Karen. Maybe we should talk to my dad? And that's how Grandpa Joe got roped into this mess. He's loaded and lives in Canada, but he flew down to play peacemaker. Karen, Tom, listen, he must have said, all calm and collected. I know this isn't what you planned, but it's happening. I'll help you out financially. Just give this child a chance. Mom, being the career-obsessed woman she is, probably huffed and puffed before finally agreeing. Fine, but I'm not letting this kid derail my life. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how I, Deborah, came to be. Born premature, with a whole host of health problems, and into a family that saw me as nothing more than an inconvenience. My early days were spent more in the hospital than at home. Mom couldn't be bothered to show up most of the time. It was Dad and Aunt Sarah who took turns keeping watch over my incubator. Aunt Sarah, now there's a saint if I ever met one. No kids or husband of her own, she latched onto me like a lifeline. While my own mother was probably off closing deals and climbing the corporate ladder, Aunt Sarah was there, holding my tiny hand through the incubator's holes, whispering words of encouragement. When I finally got to go home, Grandpa Joe swooped in again. Our house wasn't big enough for 2 kids, apparently. So, he bought us a new one. Growing up in that house was like living in a museum. Look, but don't touch. Don't make noise. Don't exist too loudly. I learned pretty damn quick that I wasn't part of the exhibit, just some unwanted artifact they couldn't get rid of. Mom and Dad were always working. When they weren't, they acted like I was some kind of leech, sucking the life out of them. We had a parade of nannies coming through the house. Some were nice, some weren't, but none of them stuck around long enough to matter. Jessica, my so-called sister, might as well have been a stranger living in the same house. 14 years is a hell of an age gap, and she made it clear she had no interest in playing big sister. I remember one time, I must have been about 6, I tried to hang out in her room while she was getting ready for college. Jessica, can I watch you do your makeup? I asked, peering around her doorframe. She barely glanced at me. No, Deborah. I'm busy. Go play with your toys or something. But I don't want to play alone, I whined. Can't we do something together? She slammed her mascara down on the dresser and whirled to face me. Look, we're not friends, okay? I'm not here to entertain you. Go bother Mom or Dad. That was pretty much the extent of our sisterly bonding. Mom was even worse. Every day when she got home from work, it was the same routine. She'd walk in, kick off her heels, and make a beeline for the liquor cabinet. Mom, I'd call out, excited to see her. Can we play a game? Or read a story? She'd pour herself a large glass of wine and sigh heavily. For God's sake, Deborah. Can't you see I need some peace and quiet? Go to your room and play by yourself. You're old enough to entertain yourself. And Dad? He'd promised Mom he'd take care of me if she had me. What a joke that turned out to be. He was always too busy or too tired to spend time with me. His favorite phrase became, "Not now, Deborah." I remember overhearing them argue about it once. I was supposed to be in bed, but I'd snuck out to get a glass of water. Tom, you promised you'd help with her, Mom hissed. I can't do this all on my own. What do you want from me, Karen," Dad shot back. "I work all day too. I'm exhausted when I get home." "She's always so needy." I didn't stick around to hear the rest. I'd heard enough to know where I stood in their eyes, a burden, an obligation, a mistake they were stuck with. After a while, I stopped trying. What was the point? I learned to entertain myself, to be quiet, to stay out of their way. I became a ghost in my own home, drifting from room to room, trying not to disturb the real family. The only bright spot in my life was Aunt Sarah. She lived nearby, and I started spending more and more time at her place. Weekends, holidays, any chance I got, really. With Aunt Sarah, I felt seen, heard, loved even. We'd spend hours doing puzzles, baking cookies, or just talking. She'd ask me about school, my friends, my hopes and dreams. Things my own parents never bothered with. Life has a funny way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. I was 14, minding my own business, trying to survive another day in the emotional wasteland I called home, when my parents dropped a bombshell on me. "Deborah," Mom said, her voice unusually chipper. "We have wonderful news. Your sister Jessica is getting married, and she's pregnant." Dad chimed in, grinning like an idiot. "We're going to be grandparents." I forced a smile, wondering why the hell they were telling me this like I should be jumping for joy. "That's great," I managed to say. "We're going to be very busy preparing for the wedding," Mom continued, not even noticing my lack of enthusiasm. "So, we want you to stay with your Aunt Sarah for a while." I blinked, processing their words. They wanted to ship me off? Because of a wedding? Part of me wanted to be hurt, but honestly, it was the best news I'd heard in years. "Sure," I said, trying not to sound too eager. "I'd love to stay with Aunt Sarah." They looked relieved, probably expecting me to put up a fight. Shows how little they knew me. I packed my bags faster than you could say unwanted child and practically skipped to Aunt Sarah's house. Months flew by. The wedding preparations were in full swing, but I couldn't care less. I was too busy enjoying my new life. Aunt Sarah and I would cook together, watch movies, go for walks in the park. She'd help me with my homework, listen to me ramble about my day at school, and actually seemed interested in what I had to say. Before I knew it, a week before Jessica's wedding rolled around. It was also my 15th birthday. That morning, I woke up to the smell of pancakes and the sound of Aunt Sarah singing off-key in the kitchen. I grinned, padding downstairs in my pajamas. "Happy birthday, my dear," Aunt Sarah exclaimed, pulling me into a bone-crushing hug. "I've got a surprise for you." She handed me a beautifully wrapped box. "It's from your grandfather, he sent it yesterday." I tore into the wrapping paper, my eyes widening as I revealed a brand new smartphone, the latest model, no less. I dialed Grandpa Joe's number, my heart racing with excitement. "Hello, birthday girl," his warm voice filled the line. "Do you like your present?" "Like it? Grandpa, I love it." "Thank you so much." We chatted for a bit, and then he asked the question I'd been dreading. "So, how did your parents congratulate you?" I hesitated, not wanting to admit the truth. "Oh, I haven't seen them yet. I was planning to go home soon, actually. I'm sure they'll say something then." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then, "I see. Well, why don't you do a live broadcast when you go? I'd love to share in the joy." With a mixture of hope and dread churning in my stomach, I made my way back to my parents' house. The walk felt both too long and too short. As I turned onto our street, I took a deep breath and started the live broadcast on my new phone. "Hey, Grandpa," I said, trying to sound cheerful. "I'm on my way to see Mom and Dad now. Thanks again for the awesome phone." I chatted away as I walked, filling the silence with babble about my morning with Aunt Sarah and how excited I was about my birthday. But as I approached our house, a sense of unease crept over me. "Well, here we are," I announced to the camera, climbing the front steps. I hesitated for a moment before pushing open the door. "Mom? Dad? I'm home." Silence greeted me. The house felt eerily quiet, almost abandoned. I frowned, panning the camera around the empty living room. Guess they're not down here, I muttered, more to myself than to Grandpa. I'll check upstairs. I climbed the stairs, my footsteps echoing in the quiet house. As I reached the top, I noticed something odd. The door to my room was closed, which was unusual. I always left it open when I wasn't home. That's weird, I said, reaching for the doorknob. My door's never closed. I pushed it open and froze. The room that greeted me was not my room. At least, not anymore. The walls, once a soft lavender, were now a pale blue. My posters were gone, replaced by cutesy animal prints. My bed had vanished, and in its place stood a white crib. What the hell? I gasped, stumbling backward. The phone nearly slipped from my grasp as I spun around, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. This can't be right. This is my room. Just then, I heard a door open behind me. I whirled around to see my parents emerging from their bedroom, looking startled to see me. "Deborah?" Mom said, her eyes darting between me and the phone in my hand. "What are you doing here?" I barely registered her words, still reeling from the shock of my transformed room. "What happened to my room?" I demanded. "Why is it blue? Where's all my stuff?" Dad cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable. "Well, you see, Deborah, we've decided to give this room to your sister's baby. Our first grandson." Mom nodded, a smile plastering itself across her face. "Yes, isn't it wonderful? Jessica's having a boy, the son your father's always dreamed of having. He'll be living here with us after the wedding." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. But where am I supposed to sleep? Where's my stuff? "Oh, we packed up your things," Dad said, waving his hand dismissively. "They're in boxes downstairs. You should take them with you when you leave. We don't want them cluttering up the place." I stared at them, unable to comprehend what I was hearing. "Leave? What do you mean, leave? This is my home." Mom's smile faltered for a moment before she forced it back into place. "Deborah, dear, you have to understand. With Jessica and her husband moving in, and the baby on the way, well, there's just no room for you here anymore." I stood there, frozen in disbelief, my mind reeling from what I'd just heard. Suddenly, a surge of anger welled up inside me, pushing through the shock. "No," I said, my voice shaking. "No, I won't leave. This is my home too. You can't just throw me out like I'm nothing." Mom's fake smile vanished, replaced by a look of irritation. "For heaven's sake, Deborah. Don't be difficult." "Difficult?" I spat back. "It's my birthday, and you're kicking me out. You didn't even remember, did you?" Dad rolled his eyes. "Your birthday? Is that what this tantrum is about? We don't have time for this nonsense." Their callousness hit me like a physical blow. I felt tears welling up in my eyes, but I blinked them back furiously. "How can you be so cruel? I'm your daughter. A daughter we never wanted," Mom snapped, her composure finally cracking. "Do you have any idea how much you've cost us? How much attention you've demanded? We're exhausted, Deborah." Dad nodded, his face twisted with annoyance. "We didn't want a second child. You were a mistake, an accident. And now, we finally have a chance at the family we always wanted." Their words cut deep, each one a knife to my heart. I watched in stunned silence as they grabbed the bags they'd packed with my belongings and started shoving them out the front door. "There," Mom said, dusting off her hands. "Now take your things and go to your precious Aunt Sarah. She loves you so much, let her deal with you." I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. This couldn't be happening. It had to be a nightmare. "What are you waiting for?" Dad barked. "Get out. We have a wedding to prepare for, and we don't need you here complicating things." That's when the dam broke. Tears streamed down my face as the full weight of their rejection crashed over me. "How could you do this to me?" I sobbed. I'm your child. Stop it, Mom hissed, glancing nervously at the windows. You're embarrassing us. The neighbors will hear. Good, I shouted through my tears. Let them hear. Let everyone know what kind of people you really are. Dad grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in painfully. That's enough, he growled, practically dragging me to the door. Get out, now. And don't come back. With one final shove, I found myself on the front porch, my bags scattered around me. The door slammed shut behind me with a finality that echoed in my bones. I don't know how long I sat there, sobbing on the steps. Eventually, I gathered my things and started the long, miserable walk back to Aunt Sarah's. The bags felt impossibly heavy, weighed down by more than just my possessions. As I trudged along, sniffling and wiping my eyes, a familiar voice suddenly cut through my misery. Deborah, can you hear me? I jumped, looking around wildly before realizing the voice was coming from my phone. With a jolt of horror, I remembered the live broadcast. Grandpa had seen everything. Grandpa? I stammered, lifting the phone with trembling hands. Oh, sweetheart, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I'm so sorry you had to go through that. Look, we'll sort this out, I promise. For now, go to Sarah's. We'll see each other at the wedding in a few days, okay? Try to enjoy your birthday. Somehow, his words managed to calm me down a little. By the time I reached Aunt Sarah's, my tears had mostly subsided. She took one look at me, standing there with my bags and puffy eyes, and pulled me into a fierce hug. Aunt Sarah, bless her heart, insisted we celebrate my birthday properly. She let me invite a few friends over, baked a cake, and did her best to make the day special. The day of Jessica's wedding arrived. I hadn't been invited, of course, but Aunt Sarah insisted we go anyway. So there I was, decked out in my best dress, feeling like an imposter as we walked into the reception hall. I spotted Grandpa Joe almost immediately. He was sitting at a table near the front, his back ramrod straight, radiating an energy that made me nervous. Before we even had time to say hello, the newlyweds made their grand entrance. Jessica looked radiant in her white gown, beaming as she clung to her new husband's arm. Mom and Dad followed, pride evident in their faces, and I felt a pang in my chest. The reception progressed with toasts, dinner, and the usual festivities. As the congratulatory speeches began during the festive dinner, Grandpa Joe suddenly stood up. I have something to say, he announced, his voice ringing out across the hall. Every head turned. Jessica and her groom looked confused. Mom and Dad went pale. Grandpa Joe marched to the front of the room, commandeering the microphone from the stunned best man. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, I apologize for interrupting this joyous occasion, but there's a grave injustice that needs to be addressed. He then launched into a detailed account of how my parents had treated me. He spared no detail, from their resentment of my birth to the cruel way they'd kicked me out on my birthday. With each word, the guests' expressions changed from confusion to shock to outrage. Mom tried to interrupt, her face beat red. Jessica was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks. Her new husband looked uncomfortable, shifting in his seat. The guests were whispering among themselves, shooting scandalized looks at my parents. Grandpa turned to face my parents directly, his voice cold as ice. So let me make this clear. I'm changing my will. Every cent I have will go to Sarah and Deborah. Tom, Karen, Jessica, you're cut off. Completely. The reception hall erupted into chaos. Mom let out a strangled cry, Dad's face turned an alarming shade of purple. Jessica wailed something about her ruined wedding. But Grandpa wasn't done. He walked over to where Aunt Sarah and I sat, shell-shocked by the spectacle. Come on, girls, he said gently. We're leaving. We don't need to stay where we're not wanted. In a daze, I stood up and followed him. As we walked towards the exit, I could feel every eye on me. Some looked sympathetic, others judgmental. I kept my gaze fixed on Grandpa's back, willing myself not to cry. The morning after the wedding disaster, I woke up to the sound of insistent knocking on Aunt Sarah's front door. Bleary-eyed and still processing the events of the previous day, I stumbled downstairs to find Mom and Dad on the porch, looking a strange mix of desperate and contrite. "Deborah, sweetie," Mom cooed, her voice sickeningly sweet. "We need to talk. We want you to come home, honey. We're so sorry about everything. We love you, we really do." I felt a surge of anger rising in my chest. "Love me? You kicked me out. You said I was a mistake." They launched into a litany of apologies and explanations, each one more pathetic than the last. But as I stood there, listening to their desperate pleas, a realization hit me like a ton of bricks. This wasn't about me at all. "This is about the inheritance, isn't it?" I said, cutting off Dad mid-sentence. Their faces fell, confirming my suspicions. They didn't want me back, they wanted Grandpa's money. "Get out," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "I don't want to see either of you ever again." I slammed the door in their faces, leaning against it as I tried to calm my racing heart. But my parents weren't done. Over the next few days, they showed up repeatedly, each time more insistent than the last. They called, they sent emails, they even tried to rope in other family members to convince me. It all came to a head about a week after the wedding. I was home alone when I heard a commotion outside. To my horror, I saw Mom and Dad trying to force their way past Aunt Sarah, who had just returned from the grocery store. "She's our daughter," Dad was yelling. "You can't keep her from us." Something in me snapped. I'd had enough of their manipulation, their lies, their sudden concern for my well-being now that money was on the line. "Aunt Sarah," I called out, my voice steadier than I felt. "I want you to be my legal guardian." The words hung in the air for a moment. Then Aunt Sarah's face broke into a wide smile. "Oh, sweetie, I'd be honored." With Aunt Sarah's help, we contacted a lawyer the very next day. The process wasn't easy, there were forms to fill out, interviews to conduct, and a court hearing to attend. But through it all, I held on to one piece of evidence that I knew would make all the difference: the video from my ill-fated birthday visit home. The day of the court hearing arrived, and I felt sick to my stomach. My parents were there, of course, playing the role of concerned, loving parents to the hilt. But when the judge asked for evidence, and we played that video, the one where they kicked me out, where they told me I was unwanted, the atmosphere in the courtroom changed. I'll never forget the look on the judge's face as she watched my parents callously toss me aside. When the video ended, she turned to them, her expression hard. "In all my years on the bench," she said, "I've rarely seen such a clear case of parental neglect and emotional abuse." The ruling came swiftly after that. Aunt Sarah was granted full legal guardianship, and my parents' rights were terminated. As the gavel came down, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. For the first time in my life, I was free of their toxic influence. Life has a funny way of coming full circle. Just when I thought the drama was finally over, Grandpa Joe called us over to his lawyer's office. As we sat in the plush leather chairs, surrounded by mahogany bookshelves and the smell of old paper, I couldn't help but feel nervous. "Deborah, Sarah," Grandpa began, his voice solemn but his eyes twinkling, "I want you both to know that I've made some changes to my will." He nodded to his lawyer, who pulled out a thick document. "As I promised at the wedding," Grandpa continued, "I've decided to leave my entire estate to you too. Tom and Karen are officially disinherited." I sat there, stunned. I knew Grandpa had threatened this at the wedding, but I never really believed he'd go through with it. As we left the lawyer's office, my head spinning with the implications of what had just happened, my phone rang. It was Jessica. "How could you do this to me?" she screeched as soon as I answered. "You've ruined everything." I pulled the phone away from my ear, wincing at her volume. "What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb," she snapped. "You turned Grandpa against us. Now he's leaving everything to you and Aunt Sarah. It's not fair. I want my share too." I felt a flash of anger. After everything that had happened, after the way they'd all treated me, she had the nerve to demand money? Look, Jessica, I said, trying to keep my voice level, I didn't ask for any of this. It was Grandpa's decision, not mine. But you must have manipulated him somehow, she insisted. You've always been jealous of me. This is your revenge, isn't it? I took a deep breath, counting to 10 in my head before responding. Jessica, I'm sorry you feel that way. But I had nothing to do with Grandpa's decision. If you want to change his mind, you'll have to talk to him yourself. Maybe I will, she huffed. And don't think this is over, Deborah. You can't just waltz in and steal what's rightfully ours. As she hung up, I felt a mix of emotions, anger, sadness, but mostly just exhaustion. And then I decided to focus on my future. I threw myself into my studies, determined to ace my exams and get into a good college. Aunt Sarah helped me research schools, majors, and scholarship opportunities. Sure, my family situation was far from perfect. There would probably be more drama with Jessica, my parents, and the inheritance down the line. But for now, I had a loving home with Aunt Sarah and Grandpa Joe, a bright future ahead of me, and the strength to face whatever challenges came my way.